On July 30th, 2025, two nature guides named Dario Sorrera and Pablo Luna were moving slowly by boat along the Bermejo River in northern Argentina when they cut the engine. On the muddy bank ahead, in the shadow of a dry forest that had not seen what they were about to see in over 3 decades, a jaguar was moving through the brush. That alone would have made the day. But this jaguar was not alone. Beside her, small and spotted and still learning how to move, was a cub, 5 months old by the look of it. Its mother, Nala, had been born in captivity less than 2 years earlier and released into this wilderness just 12 months before. Nobody predicted this would happen so quickly. The models did not predict it, the skeptics had not predicted it. This cub was the first of its kind documented in the Argentine Gran Chaco in decades. And behind that single fact lies a story about what happens when you look at a dying system, count 10 survivors, and decide to try something that most experts considered a long shot. This is the story of how 3 females changed the arithmetic of extinction. To understand why this matters, you need to know what was lost. The Gran Chaco is one of the most important ecosystems in the world, and almost nobody in the Northern Hemisphere can tell you where it is. It spreads across roughly 1 million square kilometers in the heart of South America, extending through northern Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, and parts of Brazil. It is the second largest forested region on the continent, after the Amazon. Argentina holds the largest share, a territory roughly the size of France, a mosaic of dry forest, scrubland, open savanna, and wetland. It hosts over 3,400 plant species, 500 species of birds, and 150 mammals. Caimans patrol the slow rivers. Giant armadillos move through the undergrowth at night. Maned wolves pace the grassland margins. And for 3 million years, at the top of all of this, lived the jaguar. Panthera onca is the largest cat in the Americas. A large male can weigh over 200 pounds. Unlike lions or cheetahs, the jaguar does not chase its prey. It waits. It ambushes. It kills with a single bite through the skull, a technique so powerful that no other cat in the world employs it in quite the same way. In the Gran Chaco, jaguars were the engineers of the system. They controlled the populations of capybaras, pecaris, and caimans. Their presence shaped where prey animals grazed and drank. When a jaguar begins to patrol a riverbank, the capybaras move. They become cautious. They spread out. That movement distributes grazing pressure across a wider area. It protects vegetation from being stripped bare. It reduces erosion. It keeps waterways clear of the sediment that overgrazing unlocks. You remove the jaguar, and the whole architecture begins to shift, slowly at first. Then, almost invisibly, everything changes. Jaguars once ranged continuously from the American Southwest to Patagonia, a biological corridor stretching across 2 continents. In Argentina, they were present in every major ecosystem. Then came the killing. International demand for spotted fur drove professional hunters into the Chaco from the middle of the 20th century. Hundreds of jaguars were taken annually. Their skins were exported to Europe and North America. By the time the international trade in big cat skins was banned, the populations had already been shattered. The ranches followed. Cattle operations and soy farms cut into the Chaco at a rate that scientists now describe as among the highest deforestation rates on the planet. By current estimates, the Gran Chaco loses over 130 square miles of forest every single month. In Argentina alone, more than 8 million hectares of Chaco have been cleared in the past 3 decades. As the forest fell, the jaguars that remained were pressed into smaller and smaller fragments of habitat, isolated from each other, unable to find mates, unable to maintain the genetic diversity a species needs to survive. By the time the accounting was done, jaguars had lost more than 95% of their original range in Argentina. Fewer than 250 survived across the whole country. And in Argentina's portion of the Gran Chaco, 10 individuals remained, all of them male. The last female jaguar confirmed in this region had been spotted in 1990. That was more than 3 decades before this story reaches its first real intervention. Let me put that in context. A territory roughly the size of France. 10 males, no females, no future. The turning point came not from within the Chaco, but from a wetland 400 miles to the southeast. In 1997, American conservationists Douglas and Christine Tompkins began quietly acquiring degraded ranchland in Corrientes province in Argentina's northeast. Their critics were numerous. The idea that you could restore an ecosystem of this scale, species by species, over decades, was considered by many to be either naive or arrogant. Some local communities were hostile. The government was cautious. The scientific community noted that reintroduction programs for apex predators had a mixed record globally. The Tompkinses kept buying land. They kept restoring it. They founded Conservation Land Trust Argentina, which became Rewilding Argentina, and they began bringing species back one at a time. Giant anteaters, pampas deer, collared peccaries, bare-faced curassows, red and green macaws. In 2018, after years of campaigning, the Argentine government established Iberá National Park, combining donated land with the existing provincial reserve to create a protected wilderness of 1.8 million acres, one of the largest protected areas in Argentina. At its centre, on San Alonso Island in the heart of the wetlands, they built the Jaguar Reintroduction Centre. Sebastian Di Martino, the conservation director of Rewilding Argentina, described the ecological logic that drove the strategy. Just as the return of grey wolves to Yellowstone National Park recalibrated whole ecosystems that had fallen out of balance, he said, jaguars could restore the Iberá wetlands and eventually the Gran Chaco. He had watched the Yellowstone data for years. He believed the same cascade was possible here, but first they had to prove it somewhere else. In January of 2021, the Jaguar Reintroduction Centre released its first Animals into the Wild of Iberá Park. A female named Mariua, rescued as an orphan cub in Brazil, moved through the open door of a holding pen with her 2 captive-born cubs beside her. The cubs, named Karai and Pora, were 4 months old. Cameras captured the moment, their footprints, round and fresh, pressed into the wet soil of the Iberá wetlands. The first jaguar tracks in this ecosystem in 70 years. The monitoring team watched through GPS collars and a network of camera traps. The early months were uncertain. The animals moved, they hunted, they disappeared from view for days at a time, sending the team scrambling to check signals. The first year produced modest results, alive and adapting. That was enough. By 2022, wild births had been documented. By the following year, wild-born cubs were themselves establishing territories. And by 2025, the Iberá population had grown from 0 to 35 individuals in just 4 years. The population was self-sustaining and reproducing without assistance, and it had become something more than a conservation success. It had become a source. Here is the key insight that changed everything. If Iberá could produce wild-born jaguars, and if El Impenetrable National Park was dying for lack of females, then the answer was already alive. It was just 400 miles away in the wrong ecosystem. Here is how the solution was engineered, step by step. A male jaguar named Caramta had been discovered by park rangers at El Impenetrable in 2018, identified from his tracks pressed into the mud near a river crossing. He was collared and monitored over months. GPS data revealed the circuits of a solitary animal searching for something that was not there. Long loops through the forest, detours along rivers, the same areas visited again and again as if checking whether something had changed. Captive females from the Iberá breeding centre were brought to El Impenetrable and placed in pre-release enclosures near his territory. Camera traps captured what happened next. Caramta, drawn by scent, began visiting the enclosure fence lines at night. Researchers documented the interactions. Eventually, matings occurred through the barrier. This had never been done before in the formal history of jaguar conservation. A wild male breeding with captive females in a managed reintroduction program. From those matings, cubs were born. Those cubs were raised at the facility, conditioned to hunt live prey and prepared for wild release. Nala was one of those cubs, Karamta's daughter. She carried the genetics of the last wild jaguar population surviving in the Argentine Chaco. She was released in August of 2024 after months in a pre-release enclosure where she sharpened her hunting skills and adjusted to the sounds and smells of the forest. Rangers monitored her collar signal daily as she pushed into new territory, following the same river corridors her father had walked alone for years. Karana had arrived first in March of 2024. She had been rescued as a cub from Paraguay after hunters killed her mother. She moved through the forest immediately with the ease of an animal that had been built for exactly this moment. A third female, Minnie, arrived in early 2025, becoming the first jaguar ever translocated wild to wild between two Argentine national parks, born free in Iberá, released free in El Impenetrable. She carried no memory of captivity. 3 females in a territory that had held none for 34 years. Scientists expected modest results in the first year, maybe the beginning of territorial establishment. The models suggested a wild cub might be documented within 3 to 5 years if conditions held. That was the optimistic projection. The data refused to fit the models. 12 months after Nala's release, nature guides Dario Serrere and Pablo Luna turned a bend in the Bermejo River and cut their engine. On the bank, Nala moved through the brush. Beside her, a 5-month-old cub born free in the Argentine Gran Chaco, the first documented wild jaguar cub in this ecosystem in decades. The team was notified. The photographs were reviewed, the age was estimated, the genetics were flagged. This was not a recording artifact. This was not a misidentified animal. This was Karamta's granddaughter, born free on a riverbank where her grandfather had once walked alone for years without finding a mate. Agustin Paviolo, a jaguar expert at CONICET, Argentina's National Research Council, and a scientific advisor to the reintroduction program, had predicted before the releases that the project would change the entire ecosystem by regulating wildlife populations and prey behaviours. He had not predicted the first evidence would arrive in the first year. Here is a detail that rarely makes it into the conversation. The breeding and monitoring program that produced Nala, and the female releases that followed, cost a fraction of what the conventional ecological equivalent would require. A jaguar is an apex predator that hunts every night, regulates an entire food web, and triggers behavioural changes across dozens of species. It does this without electricity, without maintenance schedules, and without salaries. The ecological equivalent in managed form, artificial population controls, manual habitat management, and ongoing captive operations would require millions of dollars annually and would produce no self-sustaining wild population. Rewilding Argentina deployed a different kind of infrastructure, one that reproduces. The cascade effects are already being documented in real time. In areas where jaguar activity is recorded, prey species have begun shifting their behaviour. Capybara and peccary herds that had expanded without predation pressure are now observed moving more frequently and spending less time on exposed riverbanks. Sections of bank vegetation that had been stripped bare by persistent overgrazing are beginning to show new growth. Researchers are comparing erosion rates in monitored river reaches against pre-release baseline data. The early pattern is consistent with what models predicted once predation pressure returned. That is not a coincidence, that is balance. Gerardo Ceron, a biologist and conservation coordinator at the El Impenetrable project, put the significance plainly. The jaguar's presence, he said, increases the biodiversity of the whole ecosystem, and its return is key to the functionality of the entire Gran Chaco region. Di Martino offered a summary of what he had observed across both parks. The national parks in this region, he said, were great but depleted of wildlife. As the ecosystem recovers, the story is changing dramatically, and the story is changing economically, not just ecologically. 400 miles south, in the Iberá wetlands, the the transformation that DiMartino had predicted is already a fact of daily life. The town of Carlos Pellegrini sits on the edge of the wetlands and once depended primarily on cattle ranching. Today, it has 900 residents and more than 30 lodging businesses, along with restaurants and guide operators offering wildlife tours by boat and on horseback. Valeria Verdeguer, the town's director of tourism, described the shift simply. People understood, she said, that it is more valuable to observe wild animals than kill them, and today, practically all town residents make a living from tourism. To keep that revenue distributed broadly, local authorities prohibit hotels with more than 5 rooms, forcing the income to spread across more households rather than concentrate in a few large operations. Marcos Garcia Rams owns a cattle ranch in Corrientes province and has built an eco-tourism operation alongside his ranching as jaguars return to the region. He told journalists that the jaguar reintroduction brings him great satisfaction and that he has no concern about jaguars taking his cattle, because the territory now holds enough natural prey for them. A rancher who a generation ago would have shot a jaguar on sight now profits from that jaguar's survival. That is not a coincidence. That is balance. But here is what this story is not. It is not a problem solved. The same summer that Nala's cub was photographed on the Rio Bermejo, a female jaguar named Akai went silent. She had been translocated from Iberá to El Impenetrable and was doing well by every measure the monitoring team used. Her GPS collar stopped transmitting. The team searched for weeks using radio signals and eventually located the collar submerged in the Rio Bermejo. Evidence gathered during the investigation pointed toward poaching. In Argentina, killing a jaguar carries serious criminal penalties. The jaguar is designated a national natural monument, the highest conservation status the country can confer. And still, someone did it. The broad attention runs deeper than a single incident. The communities surrounding El Impenetrable do not all share equally in the ecotourism revenues that conservation generates. A rancher who loses a calf to a jaguar does not receive compensation from the visitors who come to photograph that same jaguar. This asymmetry is real, and DiMartino has acknowledged it openly. Building a durable future for jaguars in the Chaco requires building an economic future for the people who live alongside them. That work remains incomplete. The deforestation continues regardless of what the camera traps show. 68% of the high-quality jaguar habitat remaining in the greater Gran Chaco region is currently unprotected. The forces driving that deforestation are global. Soy and beef are international commodities. A cub on a riverbank does not change a commodity price. And the Gran Chaco loses 130 square miles of forest every month. Scientists also raise legitimate questions about long-term genetic viability. 3 females and a small group of wild males do not make a sustainable gene pool over decades. The project requires continued introductions, continued connectivity between populations across Argentina, and eventually coordination across borders into Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil. DiMartino describes the vision as building stepping stones across the country, linking Iberá with El Impenetrable, and eventually threading the corridor through the greater Chaco. It is a real vision. It is not yet achieved. Return now to that riverbank on the Bermejo, to Dario Serrere and Pablo Luna, engine quiet, watching. Nala in the brush, with a cub at her side. The first of a generation that the model said would not arrive for years. In 1990, the last female jaguar vanished from this part of the world. For more than 3 decades, the males of El Impenetrable walked a landscape with no future. When the first female was released in March of 2024, the projections were cautious. 3 to 5 years, the optimistic models said, before a wild cub might be documented. Nature had other ideas. There are around 173,000 jaguars remaining in the world. Most are in the Amazon and the Brazilian Pantanal. The Gran Chaco population is tiny, fragile, and surrounded by pressures that have not gone away. But on a riverbank in the summer of 2025, a 5-month-old cub, that should not have existed yet was moving through the brush beside its mother, leaving the first small round prints of a new generation in the mud of the Bermejo. The system was rebuilding itself, not the way engineers rebuild things, the way nature rebuilds things, slowly, then suddenly. What surprised you most about this story? Was it the speed of the recovery? Was it how a wetland 400 miles away became a source for a dying forest? Was it the fact that one of the most ecologically important biomes in the world is barely mentioned in international conservation discussions? Tell us in the comments below. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the time to subscribe. We cover stories about restoration and the people who are fixing what is broken. Hit subscribe. See you in the next one.